أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الصلاة والسلام على سيد المرسلين وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين. Respected dignitaries, our international guests, ulama and community leaders, academic staff of the University of Leeds, and our students from the university and from other universities. We welcome you all to this wonderful event, which is entitled Theological Tolerance, Amïmul Ehsan's Ecumenism. This is a wonderful gathering here today. Just to see you all here, I think is just overwhelming for me. My name is Ridwan Harris, and I've been asked to just chair the proceedings for this evening. Just to give you a background to myself, I'm the co-founder of the Muslim Family Centre, which is run alongside the other director, Dr. Tajul Islam, who you'll be hearing from this evening. And I'm also a public engagement partner with the Iqbal Centre for the Study of Contemporary Islam. To give you a warm welcome, I'd like to invite to the stage Professor James Dickens. So if I could call upon Professor James just to give us a quick introduction, and then we will call upon some of our speakers, which I'll introduce later.
Thank you very much, Ridwan. So, to reiterate, as Ridwan says, welcome to all our guests, both from abroad, from across Britain, across the northwest, the northeast, to student members of the university, to staff members of the university, to other friends in the local community who've come this evening. Thank you very much for coming for what I think is a very important event, and I think will be a very interesting event with the series of speakers we're going to have. We have a very active Islamic Studies Centre within the university, which is part of the School of Languages, Cultures and Societies, a school that I think has a greater breadth of languages than any similar school in the country, ranging from Chinese, Japanese, through to the languages of the Middle East, Arabic, Persian, Turkish, to all the major languages of Western Europe. And amongst our scholars are a very interesting and challenging team of Islamic studies scholars, Tajul Islam, Mustafa Sheikh and others. Amongst the many things they've done is they've set up the Iqbal Centre for the Study of Contemporary Islam, which is partly sponsoring this event, and also the Amîmiyya Critical Madrasa, which is named after Amîmul Ehsan. So I think these are both very exciting initiatives, and you'll hear more about them this evening. Last, and I think very importantly, you'll all have heard about the ongoing catastrophe of the Rohingya and their expulsion and ethnic cleansing from Burma. And we have two people here this evening, Abdul Mun'im Yahya, who is going to collect money at the end of the event in support of the Rohingya from Muslim Aid, and also Shaukat Ahmad, who I think you're over here. And Shaukat is very happy to provide information about the ongoing situation. Yeah. So I'll now hand back to Ridwan. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Just to give you a background to James, who just spoke, James Dickens is the Professor of Arabic at the University of Leeds, the School of Languages, Cultures and Societies in the Department of Arabic and the Islamic and Middle Eastern Studies. He is the author of Thinking Arabic Translation and one of the leading authorities within the field of Arabic linguistics and translation. Professor Dickens has travelled extensively and lived in the Arab world, especially in the Sudan and Yemen. In addition to his academic credentials, Professor Dickens is actively committed to social justice causes, and hopefully will make a few remarks about the Rohingya crisis, which he has already done so. So my apologies to you, Professor, for not introducing you adequately at the beginning. As we've started slightly late, apologies for that too, but I will call upon our first speaker this evening, Dr. Tajul Islam. He's the lecturer in Islamic Studies in the Arabic department alongside Professor Dickens. He was awarded his PhD from the University of Exeter and his main research interest is in Islamic theology, and is a co-director of the Iqbal Center for the Study of Contemporary Islam. So without further ado, I'd like to call upon Dr. Tajul Islam to deliver his talk. Thank you.
Again, I'd like to welcome all of you. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Right, so this is a project which has been ongoing since 2014. There's a long story. The delegation that's come from Bangladesh, actually I had to locate the delegation. Tajul Islam, Amïmul is here. We'll probably talk about this in the end when you speak. Now, I've chosen this topic, Ecumenism. Now, I've got a statement from the great Catholic theologian, Professor Hans Kung. So he says, there's no peace among the nations without peace among the religions. And there's no peace among the religions without dialogue between the religions. And there's no dialogue between the religions without investigation of the foundation of the religions. Now, we already in Islam have what you can call a theology of religions, i.e. a way of dealing with the non-Muslim or the non-believing other. In fact, the Muslims don't take the Cain and Abel story as a way of explaining religious pluralism. In fact, we're compelled textually by the Quran to recognize that there are Jews and there are Christians and there are those polytheists and other people of other faith traditions. So this statement of his, I want to reword it and locate it within, if you like, Islamic thought. So there's no peace in the nation, the Ummah, without peace in the religion, the Deen. And there's no peace in the Deen without dialogue within the Deen. And there's no dialogue within the Deen without investigation of the foundations of the Deen. Now, at this point we may ask, what is this term here, ecumenism? It's a big word, and all it means is promotion of unity among Christian churches. Now, what's the relevance of Islam to this ecumenism as a phenomenon? Well, the mosque with a capital M isn't really like the church in terms of its institutional outlook. The term, however, is useful for us to understand a phenomenon which I identified in my doctoral thesis as what can be termed as theological minimalism. Now, there's other names people have used before. And regarding names, and this is one thing people find, well, you're using foreign names to understand a phenomenon in your own tradition. Shakespeare's words, what's in a name, that which we call a rose, by any other word would smell as sweet. You can actually translate that in prose Arabic. Al-ibratu bil haqa'iq wal ma'ani, la bil asma. Right? So the upshot of anything is actually the reality of the matter itself and not necessarily the names. So the phenomenon, not the noumenon, or the noumenon of it. Now, ecumenism in Islam, has it manifested before? Well, the first manifestation, at least on a political declaration, was the 2004 Amman message. And this was on what you can call an interdenominational level. So especially the two main sects in Islam, Sunni and Shia. And it was historical in the sense that ulama of all of these different denominations had to acknowledge a number of things. A number of groups, in fact. Sunni Ash'ari, Sunni Salafi, Shi'i Zaydi, Shi'i Imami, and also Ibadi sects as Muslims. And furthermore, to recognize them as Muslim groups, they couldn't excommunicate them, to throw them outside the fold of, if you like, the broad church of Islam. So this happens in 2004. On an intra-denominational level, if you like, within a certain given denomination, and let's look at Sunni Islam. In 2007, a so-called Sunni pledge emerges when sectarianism begins to ravage Sunni ranks in the West. And a document is drafted and signed by the Salafi and Sufi ulama preachers to define orthodoxy. So these are the first attempts in our times to define orthodoxy. And in short, this story that I want to share with you is about knowledge and its transformative power. It's a story of hope coming from, if you like, unassuming peoples and places. It's also a story, to some extent, cathartic for me. I'm considering as something of filial piety, birrul walidain, in its broadest sense. Right? I'm not related to this man, but he's someone I consider a father. And before I introduce Mufti Amîmul Ehsan, I want to share with you the impetus behind why we're exploring this person in particular, who's relatively unknown. This relatively unknown personality, the significance of him. So I'm from a generation of Bengali students of sacred knowledge who chose to study Islam from the original places and the original language, Arabic and Arabia. And what I felt, so it's a story of identity. Over time, I was learning Arabic and Islam, if you like, from Arabia, the madhahib, all of Sunni Islam, to some extent to the detriment of other parts of my identity. And in fact, I felt maybe the deen, the religion itself, requires this of me, to lose my own ethnicity in all of this. And I found it strange. During the 90s, when I was growing up, that nationalism was on or ethnic nationalism was considered haram. It was very prominent in the 90s. And yet many of the Ummah's other children's quite comfortably celebrated their own cultural and also scholarly achievements. Now I thought to myself, well, I know that they've been Bengali Nobel Peace Prize winners. Surely there must be an alim worth of his weight or her weight that can be celebrated in the name of Islam. And I remember asking Huzur once, that do you have an alim from Bangladesh who actually wrote in Arabic? I mean, it sounds best. Well, why doesn't he just write in Bangla or any other language? Arabic is considered, or writing in Arabic, as intellectual brilliance. Right? And he did actually suggest some names, and amongst them was this personality, Amîmul Ehsan. Never really found anything at that time. I fast forward to 2003, and I remember studying a book which trains one to become a jurisconsult, a mufti. So Uqud Rasmal Mufti with Ismail Kacholia in Bradford, a much valued figure of the European Fatwa Council. And he would mention Amîmul Ehsan quite often. He'd say, "Tumhara Bangladesh ke Amîmul Ehsan sahab, is kitab mein farmate hai," and all this. And his book, Mabadiyat Fiqh Islami, in Urdu, he mentions that it's essential reading, Amîmul Ehsan's Qawaid al-Fiqh and other books, which hopefully Raqib and some of the other students will mention. Taqi Usmani, in his introduction to Amîmul Ehsan's Ta'rifat al-Fiqhiyya, I believe it's the Lebanese version, the family can verify that, speaks of him as one of the greatest scholars of the Hanafi fiqh in the 20th century. Right? So by 2004, I start reading an Urdu book on it. I actually start switching to Urdu, because a lot of his output, literary output, was in not his own native language, Bangla, but in Urdu. And one of the particular book, which I'll share some of the gems from this, is Tarikh-e-Ilm-e-Fiqh, is the history of Islamic jurisprudence. And in that, he does something quite different from many of those of you who train in the religious tradition. He periodizes fiqh in a way which isn't done in the early days. Right. So, without further ado, let's have a look at this is just some things for me to remember. Right. So, in search of synthetic scholasticism, right, the first person to use that term was the Grand Mufti of Bosnia-Herzegovina in the 90s. He proposed something called synthetic theology. He was thinking of a way of how religion or tradition can function properly within, if you like, the challenges of modernity and the secular space. Also, another scholar that comes to mind is the great Abul Hasan al-Nadwi, Alimia, who proposes something called wasatiyya or minimalism. Some call it centrism. I think minimalism is a better term. Now, what I feel is that he was speaking about these things, synthetic theology and minimalism, in the 1940s and 50s. and some of this I'll share with you. In fact, to be more precise, I think he has more strong parallels with Hans Kung than some of these other theologians. Hans Kung carefully accounts for orthodoxy. He's still a Catholic, and the theology of religions. In other words, he learns how to deal with the non-Catholic and non-Christian other. So in 2014, when I went to Bangladesh in search of his surviving students and also family, I was led from one place to another. It took me about 2 days, and I scared the khankas, the owners, when we turned up about 11 o'clock at night. There was curfews that night. Right, so what is about Amïmul Ehsan is, how does he actually demonstrate this type of synthetic theology? Is this? He collected a lot of isnads, chains of transmission, and he dispensed it to many. So Sheikh Abdul Fattah Abu Ghudda of Syria, this is one of his sanads, this man here. Imaduddin Chaudhry, Fultali, Maulana Salahuddin, who's the Baitul Mukarram's Imam right now. I think also Maulana Muhyiddin Khan and others, right? So just to share with you how it's quite an anomaly how he deals with the different manifestations of Sunni Islam. He's written a whole book about his isnads. In fact, he's very much, he takes pride in this. It's probably one of the most voluminous works on isnad in the 20th century. And in that, I just want to share with you, he mentions who gave him ijazas and the ijazas he sought after. So here you have from Zafaruddin Bihari, Ala Hazrat, right? Ahmad Raza Khan Brelvi. Over here, Hakim al-Ummat, Maulana Ashraf Ali Thanwi. And then a few other ulama, the Asanid of ulama Farangi Mahal, Professor Francis Robinson very much is covered who are the ulama of this area and this era as well. Right. So there's a synthesis taking place here, right? Two warring factions, Barelvis and Deobandis, right? But proudly he's saying, these are my teachers. Now, he was a celebrated mufti in India. He was actually in Calcutta, he was a mufti then. The Darul Uloom Deoband knew of him and in fact referred to some of his fatwas. But after migration to Pakistan, he was offered the position of Mufti Azam of both wings. He didn't take it. I think the family will speak a bit about this. And he opted out to be the Imam of the Baitul Mukarram, the national mosque. Now, there's in the Christian tradition what you call charismatic gifts. So when a saint of God passes away, or when they're alive, do their gifts continue on? Now, there's some things in terms of, if you like, the paradox of Amîmul Ehsan is how he's received. Many of you who are students of history always want to look at historical figures and how they're received throughout time as well, and obviously within the period that they lived. Now, what we see with him is Ayub Khan's result. Ayub Khan wanted him in Pakistan to be the Mufti Azam of Pakistan, and very much sought to even host him in West Pakistan at the time. And then after independence, Sheikh Mujib also awards him that great status of the Grand Mufti of Bangladesh. He's received in the Brelvi circles and paradoxically later in the Deobandi circles as well. Right? In fact, a lot of his books have been printed in Darul Uloom, within Mazahir al-Ulum and Darul Uloom Deoband. Right, so one of the things I want to share with you is that ecumenism that I spoke about at the beginning, especially on an interdenominational level, on the major sects. So first on the Sunni Shia level, he demonstrates a type of, I'll say, an intellectual maturity in how he deals with these differences, these ikhtilafat. So there's four ways he deals with it. First, in terms of speaking about the sects without the idea of canonization, the idea of orthodoxy being formed. He only speaks about the early Muslims, Jamhuri Ahl Islam, and then the Shia groups, which is historically one of the earliest ones, and also the Khawarij. Second, and he's done this and I'll demonstrate in this text, where he's speaking about these other denominations not in a judgmental manner, in terms of the name-calling approach that many people of knowledge can fall into that trap. Right? Third, he is trying to understand Shi'ism in terms of its proximity to Sunni Islam. And I just want to show you this, what he does here. And also, he argues for the continuation of the historical Kharijites with the Ibadi sect in Oman and elsewhere. And in fact, he corrects himself. Right? So, what he does here, he actually says the Kharijites became defunct in the early history of Islam. And then he makes some footnotes here, and he speaks about them. He says, "Magar Khawarij masail Sharia mein Ahle Sunnat se takriban bilkul muttafiq." For someone to say that, right? The Khawarij or the Ibadis at this point are almost 100% Sunni, right? So that's the first group he deals with, the Ibadi, and historically they're the earliest. And then also what the Ibadis say about themselves. हम लोगों में से कुछ लोग हनफी उसूल में के पाबंद है, कुछ लोग मालिकी के उसूल के पाबंद है. Some of us are Hanafi in usul in principle, some of us are Maliki in usul. In other words, they themselves, Ibadis, are placing themselves within a Sunni idiom. He deals with the Zaydis, and he says this. First of all, identifying who they belong to, the sect is ascribed to. But he says, ये मज़हब फ़ुरू में मज़हब अहले सुन्नत से बहुत करीब है. So this school, the Zaydis, now in Yemen, are very close to the Sunni Muslims. And he actually goes on to say that they regard Imam Ali as the most rightful, but accept the caliphate of the other Abu Bakr, Umar and Usman. The Imamiyya Shias, or the 12 Shias, he speaks of them, and he speaks of the fact that the proximity there as well. That's a little bit more difficult. But he says Imam Jafar as-Sadiq, Ahl Sunnat ke Musallam Imam the. He's an established Imam of the Sunni. In other words, you can't do takfir. You can't excommunicate. In fact, he goes one step further, even with the Ismailis. This is where it gets more difficult. And identifying them, in fact, he says in the Fatimid period, what happened is their fiqh tradition just more or less morphed into Sunni Islam. And in fact, the Al-Azhar Sharif, which is Sunni Islam's, if you like, main source of reference, becomes synthetic in nature. So that's on the Sunni Shia level. So within, if you like, the Sunni Salafi Sufi, you see him paying homage to some of the great scholars of both Salafi Islam. You can see this. Ibn al-Qayyim, he says, Hanbaliya mein Ibn Taymiyyah or Ibn al-Qayyim. He's quoting them as some of the great scholars of the Hanbali madhab, and he says, وَغَيْرَ جو مذاہب کے بہترین علماء تھے. They're the best of these schools. We see again how he deals with, especially Sunni Islam within the subcontinent. Shah Waliullah as the main patriarch of this sanad, and then others as well, his son, and again Ahmad Raza Khan, and then Ashraf Ali Thanwi. And the key thing is, what does he do here? He lists who these people are, who the authorities are, and then he does what many Christian theologians do, canonize the saints. So in Buzurgor ke ilawa all bahut se fuqaha karam guzar gaye. So Allah in tamam par beshumar rahmat nazil farmaye. May God bless all of these. So many other scholars I haven't mentioned, but these are all the fuqaha of Islam. Right. So that's that. Now, when Bangladesh becomes independent, he's one of the first scholars to actually include the word Bangladesh itself in the Arabic khutbah. And the Arabic khutbah is not even translated. It's considered as a substitute of the prayer in itself. And he mentions this, وَجْعَلْ بِلَادَ Bangladesh وَسَائِرَ الْبُلْدَانِ الْإِسْلَامِيَّةِ الْمُسْلِمِينَ أَمِنَةً مُطْمَئِنًّا. Yep. And finally, going back to theological minimalism, Tajul Islam, if I remember, he never wrote in Bangla. All of his books were in Arabic and Urdu. And I remember I got a free copy from yourself back then in 2014. And I came across this, and it's quite interesting what he says. So I haven't got my glasses. I'll have to read this out. Sorry, my Bangla isn't too good, right? So if I make a mistake, please forgive me. Right. Hazrat Mufti Sahib, dormer fitna, fasad, or firkabandita, pasand korten nai. Mufti Sahib didn't used to like polemical, schismatic debates, right? And what else? So, and also arguing about very small issues. And then one of the things which divides very much the Bangladeshi community is Mawlid, celebrating the Prophet's birthday. And he says regarding this, he used to personally do this, but he didn't really condemn anyone who didn't do it. Right, so with this in mind, I'm just short my speech is Bir al-Walidain is something I mentioned earlier, filial piety, right? He's someone our sanat goes back to. And by filial piety, we remember him and reconnect with his legacy. He is our diasporic and also ummatic treasure, right? And in terms of why don't we know him, there's a poem I came across with Maulana Rumi said, Deedane dana ibadat i buwad, fath abwabe saadat i buwad, jumla alam i sabab gumrah shud, kam kizis abdal haq agah shud. So recognizing the wise man in itself is devotion, in itself is ibadat, right? And it is the source of happiness and tranquility. Jumla alam I sabab gumrah shud. The entire world might be unaware of this. Kam kisi abdal haq agah shud. Even very few saints of God recognize who the saints are. So with this, I thank you for your attention and my speech here. Thank you very much. I'll just leave this over. Right?
Thank you, Dr. Taj, for your presentation. It puts our event in context as to who we're actually celebrating and remembering. I'd like to call upon our second speaker, who will be talking about some of the classical training that students of knowledge go through about the Dars-e-Nizami. I'd like to call upon Iram Bostan, who is currently on her master's by research program. She was awarded a first class in Islamic studies here at the University of Leeds and is now undertaking the Dars-e-Nizami studies in Yorkshire. So without further ado, I'd like to call upon Iram to deliver her.
Assalamu alaikum. Hello and thank you all for being here. I'd just like to start off by saying thank you to Dr. Islam for such an insightful talk. Now, I'd like to begin by being completely honest regarding my contribution today. When Dr. Islam first invited me to speak about my journey through religious studies, I was very hesitant to accept. Now, there are a number of reasons for this. Firstly, being the introverted academic that I am, well, let's just say none of us particularly like public speaking. Secondly, and more importantly, I was being asked to discuss one of the most highly contested, volatile, and political issues in the contemporary world. That is, my talk would undoubtedly traverse the treacherous terrain that is the status of women in Islam. And this fed into my dilemma when it came to attributing an appellation to my talk. How could I put into words such a complex journey without falling into cliches and platitudes, as is often the case with these types of discussions? After much deliberation, I came to the title Reclaiming Our Tradition. Because as someone who views themselves as a feminist, that is someone who believes in the equality of men and women, and someone who equally considers themselves a devout believer, that is someone who has devoted their life in the pursuit of religious knowledge, I felt the need to emphasize the fact that we, as women, equally have contributed to and equally have a claim upon the religious heritage of Islam. From the mother of the believers, Aisha radiallahu anha, to the great Sufi saint Rabia al-Adawiyya, to the founder of the oldest institution of higher learning, Fatima al-Fihri, Muslim women have played important roles in the interpretation and the preservation of religious knowledge throughout history. Something that is not always highlighted and emphasized enough in my opinion. Thankfully, the terms Sheikha or Alima in the modern day are very much becoming normalized in not only reformist platforms but also traditionalist networks. We know that Allah exhorts the believers to supplicate, وَقُلْ رَبِّ زِدْنِي عِلْمًا, Lord, increase my knowledge. To be able to converse fluently regarding the knowledge of Islam, one must firstly learn the language of Islam. And when I say this, I don't simply mean Urdu, Arabic, Farsi, or Turkish. No. What I'm actually referring to is the legal, theological, and philosophical heritage that has been preserved for over a millennium and throughout the history of the Islamic world, and it continues to be taught across the Muslim world today. I am, of course, referring to the Dars-e-Nizami. For me, as a Muslim woman, studying the Dars-e-Nizami has been an empowering experience. Not only is one able to access the rules and the regulations that are lived by countless Muslims across the world, but one is also able to discern why these rules came to be and through what frameworks they were actually developed. Equally, one also becomes privy to numerous nuanced and fascinating discussions and debates that would otherwise remain inaccessible. For example, not many people know about the debate amongst medieval scholars regarding God sending female prophets. So the fact that Mary, mother of Jesus, and Sarah, the wife of Abraham, may God's peace and blessings be upon them all, were prophets of God, was a common held view within certain spheres of Islamic scholarship. As a feminist, I accept that there are views and ideas and rulings that I can often come across that are worrying and deleterious. We already know most of fiqh, Islamic legal theory, pertains to women's issues, from the banal hayd and nifas to the more complicated such as testimonies, divorce, and inheritance. The fact that there are edicts that state that women's testimony should not be accepted due to a lack of women's intellect is worrying, as well as edicts that state that women should return to their husbands even if they are physically abused. Upon accessing this knowledge within our texts, theoretical and subjective knowledge male scholars have of women becomes all too apparent. In the basic rites of passage, birth, marriage, divorce, attacks on selfhood, death, the custodians of these institutions are predominantly men. Muslim women need to access these traditions and be able to interpret and have input regarding these matters. This was readily accepted by some of the great scholars of the past. The great Imam Shafi said, Al-ibratu bi-adat an-nisa. The conclusion in feminine matters is down to women's custom. In other words, regarding the issues of women know best. Perhaps we can define this as feminine urf, which not only is a legal maxim in and of itself, but in essence all of what can be termed fiqh an-nisa. But I don't simply want to overgeneralize. Engaging with our tradition equally, it critically also presents us with the ability to highlight aspects of the tradition that sought to protect and empower women, aspects that should be emphasized and highlighted. For example, I must share with you all a gem I came across when sifting through a classical legal text only the other day. The edict is found in the Hanafi legal manual of Ghazi Khan, in which a discussion ensues regarding a woman who has been divorced by her husband, but the husband refuses to accept the divorce has taken place. It reads, a woman knows with certainty that her husband has divorced her thrice, yet the husband denies having divorced her. As the wife is helpless in preventing the husband from having access to her, it is permissible for her to kill her husband. However, it is proper that she should kill him with drugs rather than with an instrument of death in case she is charged with his murder. Now, women killing their husbands with an overdose of opium, for example, is not probably something that jumps into mind when people mention God's sacred law. So, if by now we have established that studying the Dars-e-Nizami is important, yet we recognise it has its shortcomings on gender-related issues, how exactly do we proceed? It is a difficult question and one that continues to be challenging for those in the field. with the rise of Islamophobic literature using the subjugation of Muslim women as a justification for anti-Muslim sentiment, and the historical use of this trope during the colonial period, one must be ever cautious of falling into the Orientalist gaze regarding the oppressed Muslim woman. Equally, however, Muslim women who study the Islamic legal tradition often find certain rulings that clearly espouse unequal gender norms. How to navigate these pitfalls is an issue that is widely debated, and a number of contemporary approaches are currently being developed in order to deal with these issues at hand. The meteoric rise of Islamic feminist groups and what has been dubbed Muslim theology is one example of such. Another can be seen with our very own Professor Said and his critical Muslim studies, and also the fantastic work being done by Dr. Sheikh and Dr. Islam here at the Iqbal Centre serve as another case in point. As God states in the Quran, وَالَّذِينَ جَاهَدُوا فِينَا لَنَهْدِيَنَّهُمْ سُبُلَنَا وَإِنَّ اللَّهَ لَمَعَ الْمُحْسِنِينَ. And those who strive for God, we will surely guide them to our ways, and indeed Allah is with the doers of good. We must all continue to struggle for God, fighting for truth, justice and integrity in all that we do. We are today celebrating a man who dedicated his life to doing just that, Mufti Amïmul Ehsan Sahib. He reached the heights by studying the classical tradition and modifying it. We, as Muslim women, should learn from his example and equally study our tradition and equally rectify and modify aspects that we understand to be outside of the Sharia. In the internal words of Ibn al-Qayyim, the Sharia is based upon justice. Every matter which abandons justice is not part of the Sharia. By studying our tradition and empowering ourselves, we must reclaim the principles that this tradition was based upon. Muslim women must courageously step forth and be proud of our heritage, and at the same time keep an ever critical eye as our mothers before us did. We must walk in the footsteps of Aisha, Amra bint Abdul Rahman, Rabi al-Basri, Salama, Fatima al-Fikri, and so many others. Today, Mufti Sahib is being honoured by his granddaughter, Sayyidah Umayma, and his disciples, of which I hope includes me. The tradition is ours. We should take ownership of it, and we will find honest, informed, critical, and creative ways of reconnecting to the chain, silsila, which goes back to our master and beloved Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam. Thank you for listening.
I'm just a bit cautious of the dinner that awaits me when I get home, and make sure there's no arsenic or opium in it, but inshallah, I'm sure my wife loves me. Okay, let's move on to our next speaker, who is Muhammad Raqib. Muhammad Raqib is a student of knowledge. He studied Arabic in the Popular Institution of Humanities in France, and since his return he's been studying privately with the ulamas within the region. So without further ado, I'll hand you over to Muhammad Raqib to deliver his talk. Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Good evening. So my title is on the topic Secularity and Sacred Law, based on Mufti Amîmul Ehsan's legal maxims. So I'd like to talk about a certain book authored by Sayyid Amîmul Ehsan, which is an amalgam of jurisprudential treasures. It consists of 5 works, 3 of which are his own, and 2 abridgments of Qadi al-Dabusi and Imam al-Karkhi's legal principles. The first treatise is his jurisprudential lexicon entitled At-Ta'rifat al-Fiqhiyya, which is in circulation in the Arab world and arguably more accessible than al-Jurjani's eponymous book. The second is on the conventions of delivering legal edicts, Adab al-Ifta, which is his prose rendition of Ibn Abidin's versified Uqud Rasm al-Mufti. The third and most important of the collection, and the focus of my presentation today, is his treatise on legal maxims, Qawaid al-Fiqhiyya. It is likely that his vision for Muslim identity politics at the time was similar to Turkish ulama, who realized the only viable way to preserve or keep the Sharia relevant is preserving the legal maxims, which are not necessarily scriptural in nature, but rather inductive. And as a result, they frequently conflict with each other. Now, this is not necessarily a negative thing, but it does allow flexibility in legislation. And in its codified form, it is ideal for positive legal, and by that I mean secular frameworks. We are all aware of the tensions between religion and secularism. The Catholic theologian Hans Küng proposes that secularism needs a good dose of religiosity to cater for most communities in which faith still plays a significant role. And likewise, religion needs a good dose of what he terms secularity, a type of intellectual and political maturity when it comes to dealing with modernity. Now, this is not necessarily secularism in the Eurocentric sense. It is rather akin to late 19th and early 20th century Islamic interpretations of La tansa nasibaka min ad-dunya, don't forget your portion of the world, and the prophetic tradition, Antum adra bi umuri dunyakum, you, my companions, are more acquainted with your worldly affairs. Object-orientated jurisprudence, the Maqasidi school, and its proponents in our times, both Islamists and secular nationalists, are aware that legal maxims allow the practical and pragmatic implementation of the objectives of the Sharia in secular settings. Sayyid Amïmul Ehsan realized that this way of incorporating aspects of the Muslim law was inevitable in the wake of A, Pakistani Islamic Republic, B, a Hindu majority India, and even later, C, a Muslim